Good morning, and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am your host, Bo Heckman. Today we are continuing in the riveting psychological thriller, Rebecca. And we have our guest reader, Amy Bjorklund, here to take us into that world. Amy, how are you today?
I am very well. How are you doing?
I am doing well. It's getting kind of cold out here in front of this creepy house.
Yes. Yes, the rain's coming. Yes.
The rain is coming.
Yes. Well,
Where are
England.
we in Where are we in Rebecca? What's going on?
Yeah, so we just met the sister-in-law, Beatrice, Mr. Maxim's sister, and her husband, Giles, and Mr. Crawley, the groundskeeper. So we got a lot of new personalities popping in. I really like Beatrice. I think she's loud and outspoken and fantastic. But everyone kind of has this tinge of secrecy, which obviously being a mystery, it should. But it's really interesting to kind of see where everyone kind of catches themselves and what they say and don't say about Rebecca and all that. So it's pretty cool.
Yes. Sometimes it's what's not said.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Or these like weird pauses that everyone suddenly stops talking and you go, what did I miss? What am I not following? Yeah.
And you are beginning at chapter 10 today.
Yes. So chapter 10, Beatrice and Giles just drove off. So like the first pages, we watched the car disappear. That's Beatrice and Giles's car leaving. So chapter 10 of this version.
I will let you take it away.
All right, off we go. So,
thank you very much, Amy.
Thanks so much, Bo. So we just had lunch and a little afternoon chatting with Beatrice and Giles. And yes, like I said, they're the ones leaving. We are in chapter 10 and with the glare of the TV. There we go. Boom. And let's see what happens next. I'm very excited. I don't know about you, but I am loving this book. Fantastic. Okay. We watched the car disappear around the sweep of the drive, and then Maxim took my arm and said, "Thank God that's that. Get a coat quickly and come out. Damn the rain. I want to walk. I can't stand this sitting about." He looked white and strained, and I wondered why the entertaining of Beatrice and Giles, his own sister and brother-in-law, could have tired him so. "Wait while I run upstairs with my coat." "There's a heap of macintoshes on the flower room. Get one of them," he said impatiently. "Women are always a half an hour when they go to their bedrooms. Robert, fetch a coat from the flower room, will you, for Mrs. De Winter? There must be half a dozen raincoats hanging there, left by people of one time or another." He was already standing in the drive and calling to Jasper. "Come on, you lazy little beggar, and take some off that fat off." Jasper ran around in circles, barking hysterically at the prospect of his walk. "Shut up, you idiot," said Maxim. "What on earth is Robert doing?" Robert came running out of the hall, carrying a raincoat, and I shrugged into it immediately, fumbling with the collar. It was too big, of course, and too long, but there was no time to change it, and we set off together across the lawn to the woods, Jasper running in front. "I find a little of my family goes a very long way," said Maxim. "Beatrice is one of the best people in the world, but she invariably puts her foot in it." I was not sure where Beatrice had blundered, and thought it better not to ask. Perhaps he still resented the chat about his health before lunch. "What do you think of her?" he went on. "I liked her very much," I said. "She was very nice to me." "What did she talk to you about out there, after lunch?" "Oh, I don't know. I think I did most of the talking. I was telling her about Mrs. Van Hopper and how you and I met and all that. She said I was quite different than what she expected." "What the devil did she expect?" "Someone much smarter, more sophisticated, I imagine. A social butterfly," she said. Maxim did not answer for a moment. He bent down and threw a stick for Jasper. "Beatrice can sometimes be infernally unintelligent," he said. We climbed the grass bank above the lawns and plunged into the woods. The trees grew very close together, and it was dark. We trod upon broken twigs, last year's leaves, and here and there the fresh green stubble of the young bracken, and the shoots of the bluebells soon to blossom. Jasper was silent now, his nose to the ground. I took Maxim's arm. "Do you like my hair?" I asked. He stared down at me in astonishment. "Your hair?" he said. "Why on earth do you ask? Of course I like it. What's the matter with it?" "Oh, nothing," I said. "I just wondered." "How funny you are." he said. We came to a clearing in the woods, and there were two paths going in opposite directions. Jasper took the right-hand path without hesitation. Not that way, called Maxim. Come on, old chap. The dog looked back at us and stood there, wagging his tail, but did not return. Why does he want to go that way? I asked. I suppose he's used to it, said Maxim briefly. It leads to a small cove where we used to keep a boat. Come on, Jasper, old man. We turned into the left-hand path, not saying anything, and presently I looked over my shoulder and saw that Jasper was following us. This brings us to the valley I told you about, said Maxim, and you shall smell the azaleas. Never mind the rain, it'll bring out the scent. He seemed all right again now, happy and cheerful, the Maxim I knew and loved, and he began talking about Frank Crawley and what a good fellow he was, so thorough and reliable, and devoted to Manderley. This is better, I thought. This is like it was in Italy. And I smiled up at him, squeezing his arms, relieved that the odd, strained look in his face had passed away. And while I said, yes, and really, and fancy, darling, my thoughts wandered back to Beatrice, wondering why her presence should have disturbed him, what she had done. And I thought, too, of all she had said about his temper, how he lost it, she told me, about once or twice a year. She must know him, of course. She was his sister. But it was not what I had thought. It was not my idea of Maxim. I could see him moody, difficult, irritable perhaps, but not angry as she had inferred, not passionate. Perhaps she had exaggerated. People very often were wrong about their relatives. There, said Maxim, take a look at that. We stood on a slope of a wooded hill, and the path wound away before us to a valley by the side of this running stream. There were no dark trees there, no tangled undergrowth, but on either side of the narrow path stood azaleas and rhododendrons, not blood-colored like the giants on the drive, but salmon, white and gold, things of beauty and grace, drooping their lovely, delicate heads in the soft summer rain. The air was full of their scent, sweet and heady, and it seemed to me as though their very essence had mingled with the running waters of the stream, and became one with the falling rain and the dank, rich moss beneath our feet. There was no sound here but the tumbling of the little stream and the quiet rain. When Maxim spoke, his voice was hushed, too, gentle and low, as if he had no wish to break upon the silence. We call it the Happy Valley, he said. We stood quite still, not speaking, looking down upon the clear white faces of the flowers closest to us, and Maxim stooped and picked up a fallen petal and gave it to me. It was crushed and bruised and turning brown at the curled edge, but as I rubbed it across my hand, the scent rose to me, sweet and strong, vivid as the living tree from which it had came. Then the birds began. First a blackbird, his note clear and cool above the running stream, and after a moment he had answered from his fellow hidden in the woods behind him, and soon the still air about us was made turbulent with song, pursuing us as we wandered down into the valley, and the fragrance of the white petals followed us too. It was disturbing, like an enchanted place. I had not thought it could be as beautiful as this. The sky, now overcast and sullen, so changed from the early afternoon, and the steady, insistent rain could not disturb the soft quietude of the valley. The rain and the rivulet mingled with one another, and the liquid note of the blackbird fell into the damp air in harmony with both. I brushed the dripping heads of the azaleas as I passed. So close they grew together, bordering the path. Little drops of water fell into my hands from the soaked petals. There were petals at my feet, too, brown and sodden, bearing their scent upon them still, and a richer, older scent as well, the smell of deep moss and bitter earth, the stems of bracken and the twisted roots of trees. I held Maxim's hand, and I had not spoken. The spell of the Happy Valley was upon me. This, at last, was the core of Manderley, the Manderley I would know and learn to love. The first drive was forgotten, the black herded woods, the glaring rhododendrons, luscious and overproud, and the vast house, too, the silence of that echoing hall, the uneasy stillness of the west wing, draped in dust sheets. There I was an interloper, wandering in rooms that did not know me, sitting at a desk and in a chair that was not mine. Here it was different. The Happy Valley knew no trespassers. We came to the end of the path, and the flowers formed an archway above our heads. We bent down, passing underneath, and when I stood straight again, brushing the raindrops from my hair. I saw that the valley was behind us, and the azaleas and the trees, and as Maxim had described to me that afternoon, many wakes in Monte Carlo, we were standing in a little narrow cove, the shingle hard and white under our feet, and the sea was breaking on the shore beyond us. Maxim smiled down at me, watching the bewilderment on my face. "It's a shock, isn't it?" he said. "No one ever expects it. The contrast is too sudden, it almost hurts." He picked up a stone and flung it across the beach for Jasper. "Fetch it, good man," he said, and Jasper, streaking away in search of the stone, his long black ears flopping in the wind. The enchantment was no more. The spell was broken. We were mortal again, two people playing on a beach. We threw more stones, went to the water's edge, flung ducks and drakes, and fished for driftwood. The tide had turned and came lapping in the bay. The small rocks were covered, the seaweed washed on the stones. We rescued a big floating plank and carried it up to the beach above high water mark. Maxim turned to me, laughing, wiping the hair out of his eyes, and I unrolled the sleeves of my mackintosh caught by the sea spray. And then we looked around and saw that Jasper had disappeared. We called and whistled, and he did not come. I looked anxiously toward the mouth of the cove where the waves were breaking upon the rocks. "No," said Maxim. "We should have seen him. He can't have fallen." "Jasper, you idiot, where are you? Jasper! Jasper!" "Perhaps he has gone back to the Happy Valley," I said. "He was by that rock a minute ago, sniffing a dead seagull." We walked up to the beach toward the valley once again. "Jasper! Jasper!" called Maxim. In the distance, beyond the rocks to the right of the beach, I heard a short, sharp bark. "Hear that?" he said. "He's climbed over this way." I began to scramble up the slippery rocks in the direction of the bark. "Come back," said Maxim sharply. "We don't want to go that way. The fool of a dog must look after himself." I hesitated, looking down from my rock. "Perhaps he's fallen," I said. "Poor little chap. Let me fetch him." Jasper barked again, further away this time. "Oh, listen, I must get him. It's quite safe, isn't it? The tide won't have to cut him off." "He's all right," said Maxim irritably. "Why not leave him? He knows his way back." I pretended not to hear and began scrambling over the rocks towards Jasper. Great, jagged boulders screened the view, and I slipped and stumbled on the wet rocks, making my way as best as I could in Jasper's direction. It was heartless of Maxim to leave Jasper, I thought, and I could not understand it. Besides, the tide was coming in. I came upon the big boulder that had hidden the view and looked beyond it, and I saw to my surprise that I was looking down into another cove, similar to the one I had left, but wider and more rounded. A small stone breakwater had been thrown out across the cove for shelter, and behind it, the bay formed a tiny natural harbor. There was a buoy anchored there, but no boat. The beach on the cove was a white shingle like the one behind me, but steeper, shelving suddenly to the sea. The woods came down to the angle of seaweed marking high water, encroaching almost to the rocks themselves, and at the fringe of the woods was a low, long building, half cottage, half boathouse, built of the same stone as the breakwater. There was a man on the beach, a fisherman perhaps, in long boots and a sou'wester, and Jasper was barking at him, running around him in circles, darting at his boots. The man took no notice. He was bending down, scraping the shingle. "Jasper!" I shouted. "Jasper, come here!" The dog looked up, wagging his tail, but he did not obey me. He went on baiting the solitary figure on the beach. I looked over my shoulder. There was still no sign of Maxim. I climbed down over the rocks to the beach below. My feet made a crunching noise across the shingle, and the man looked up at the sound. I saw then that he had the small slit eyes of an idiot and the red, white mouth. He smiled at me, showing toothless gums. "Good day," he said. "Dirty, ain't it?" "Good afternoon," I said. "No, I'm afraid it's not very nice weather." He watched me with interest, smiling all the while. "Diggin' for shell," he said. "No shell here. Been diggin' since forenoon." "Oh," I said. "I'm sorry you can't find any." "That's all right. No shell here." "Come on, Jasper. It's getting late." "Come on, old boy." But Jasper was in an infuriating mood. Perhaps the wind and sea had gone to his head, for he backed away from me, barking stupidly, and began racing around the beach after nothing at all. I saw he would never follow me, and I had no lead. I turned to the man who had bent down to do his futile digging. "Have you got any string?" I said. "Eh?" "Have you got any string?" I repeated. "No shell here," he said, shaking his head. Been digging since forenoon. He nodded his head at me and wiped his pale blue, watery eyes. I want something to tie the dog, I said. He won't follow me. Eh? He said, and he smiled his poor idiot smile. All right, I said, it doesn't matter. He looked at me uncertainly and then leaned forward and poked me in the chest. I know that dog, he said. He comes from the house. Yes, I said. I want him to come back with me now. He's not yourn, he said. He's Mr. De Winter's dog, I said gently. I want to take him back to the house. Eh? He said. I called Jasper once more, but he was chasing a feather blown by the wind. Wonder if there was any string in the boathouse, and I walked up the beach toward it. There must have been a garden once, but now the grass was long and overgrown, crowded with nettles. The windows were boarded up, no doubt the door was locked, and I lifted the latch without much hope. To my surprise, it opened after the first stiffness, and I went inside, bending my head because of the low door. I expected to find the usual boat store, dirty and dusty with disuse, ropes and blocks and oars upon the floor. The dust was there, and the dirt too, in places, but there were no ropes or blocks. The room was furnished and ran the whole length of the cottage. There was a desk in the corner, a table and chairs, and a bed sofa pushed against the wall. There was a dresser too, with cups and plates. Bookshelves, the books inside them, and models of ships standing on the tops of shelves. For a moment I thought it must be inhabited. Perhaps the poor man on the beach lived there. But I looked around me again and saw no sign of recent occupation. That rusted grate knew no fire, this dusty floor no footsteps, and the china there on the dresser was blue-spotted with the damp. There was a queer musty smell about the place. Cobwebs spun threads upon the ship's models, making their own ghostly rigging. No one lived here. No one came here. The door had creaked on its hinges when I opened it. The rain pattered on the roof with a hollow sound and tapped upon the board windows. The fabric of the sofa bed had been nibbled by mice or rats. I could see the jagged holes in the frayed edges. It was damp in the cottage, damp and chill, dark and oppressive. I did not like it. I had no wish to stay there. I hated the hollow sound of the rain pattering the roof. It seemed to echo in the room itself, and I heard the water dripping too on the rusted grate. I looked about me for some string. There was nothing that would serve my purpose, nothing at all. There was another door at the end of the room, and I went to it and opened it, a little fearful now, a little afraid, for I had the odd, uneasy feeling that I might come upon something unawares that I had no wish to see, something that might harm me, something that might be horrible. It was nonsense, of course, and I opened the door. It was only a boat store, after all. Here were the ropes and blocks I had expected, 2 or 3 sails, fenders, a small punt, pots of paint, all the litter and junk that goes with the using of boats. A ball of twine lay on a shelf, a rusted clasp knife beside it. This would be all I need for Jasper. I opened the knife and cut a length of twine and came back into the room again. I came out of the cottage hurriedly, not looking behind me, trying not to see the torn sofa and the mildewed china and the spun cobwebs of the model ships, and so through the creaking grate and on the white beach. The man was not digging anymore. He was watching me, Jasper at his side. Come along, Jasper, I said. Come on, good dog. I bent down, and this time he allowed me to touch him and pull hold of his collar. I found some string in the cottage, I said to the man. He did not answer, and I tied the string loosely around Jasper's collar. Good afternoon, I said, tugging at Jasper. The man nodded, staring at me with his narrow eyes. I saw ye go in yonder, he said. Yes, I said, it's all right. Mr. De Winter won't mind. She don't go in there now, he said. No, I said, not now. She's gone to the sea, ain't she? He said. She won't come back no more. No, I said, she'll not come back. I never said nothing, did I? He said. No, of course not. Don't worry. He bent down again to his digging, muttering to himself. I went across the shingle and I saw Maxim waiting for me by the rocks, his hands in his pockets. I'm sorry, I said. Jasper would not come. I had to get some string. He turned abruptly on his heel and made towards the wood. Aren't we going back over the rocks? I said. What's the point? We're here now, he said briefly. We went up past the cottage and struck to a path through the woods. I'm sorry I was such a time. It was Jasper's fault, I said. He kept barking at the man. Who is he? Only Ben, said Maxim. He's quite harmless, poor devil. His old father used to be one of the keepers, and they lived near the home farm. Where'd you get that piece of twine? I found it in the cottage on the beach, I said. Was the door open? Yes, I pushed it open. I found the string in the other room where the sails are in a small boat. Oh, he said. I see. And then he added after a moment or two, that cottage is supposed to be locked. The door has no business to be open. I said nothing. It was not my affair. Did Ben tell you the door was open? No, I said. He did not seem to understand anything I asked him. He makes out he's worse than he is, said Maxim. He can talk quite intelligently if he wants to. He's probably been in and out of that cottage a dozen times and did not want you to know. I don't think so, I answered. The place looked deserted, quite untouched. There was dust everywhere, no footmarks. Terribly damp. I'm afraid those books will be quite spoiled in the chairs and that sofa. There are rats there, too. They have eaten away some of the covers. Maxim did not reply. He walked at a tremendous pace, and the climb up to the beach was steep. It was very different from Happy Valley. The trees were dark here and close together. There were no azaleas brushing the path. The rain dripped heavily from the thick branches. It splashed on my collar and trickled down my neck. I shivered. It was unpleasant, like a cold finger. My legs ached after the unaccustomed scramble over the rocks. And Jasper lagged behind, weary from his wild scamper, his tongue hanging from his mouth. Come on, Jasper, for God's sake. Make him walk up, pull at the twine or something, can't you? Beatrice was right. That dog is much too fast. It's your fault, I said. You walk too fast. We can't keep up with you. If you would listen to me instead of rushing wildly over those rocks, we'd have been home by now, said Maxim. Jasper knew his way perfectly. I can't think what you wanted to go after him for. I thought he might have fallen, and I was afraid of the tide, I said. Is it likely I should have left the dog had there been any question of the tide, said Maxim. I told you not to go on those rocks, and now you're grumbling because you are tired. I'm not grumbling, I said. Anyone, even if they had legs of iron, would be tired walking at this pace. I thought you would come with me when I went after Jasper anyway, instead of staying behind. Why should I exhaust myself carrying to the damn dog, he said. It was no more exhausting careering after Jasper on the rocks than it was careering after driftwood on the beach, I answered. You just say that because you have not any other excuse. My God, child, what am I supposed to excuse myself about? Oh, I don't know, I said wearily. Let's stop this. Not at all. You began it. What do you mean by saying I was trying to find an excuse? Excuse for what? Excuse for not having to come with me over the rocks, I suppose, I said. Well, and why did you think I did not want to cross over to the other beach? Oh, Maxim, how should I know? I'm not a thought reader. I know you did not want to. That's all. I could see it on your face. See what in my face? I already told you. I could see you did not want to go. Oh, let's do have an end to it. I'm sick of death of this subject. All women say that when they've lost an argument. All right, I did not want to go to the other beach. Will that please you? I never go near the bloody place or that goddamned cottage. And if you had my memories, you would not go there either, or talk about it, or even think about it. There. You can digest that if you like, and I hope it satisfies you. His face was white, and his eyes strained and wretched with that dark, lost look they had when I first met him. I put my hand out to him. I took hold of his, holding it tight. Please, Maxim, please, I said. What's the matter? He said roughly. I don't want you to look like that. It hurts too much. Please, Maxim, let's forget all we said. A futile, silly argument. I'm sorry, darling. I'm sorry. Please let everything be all right. We ought to have stayed in Italy, he said. We ought never to have come back to Manderley. God, what a fool I was to come back. He brushed through the trees impatiently, striding even faster than before, and I had to run to keep pace with him, catching my breath, tears very near the surface, dragging poor Jasper after me on the edge of his string. At last we came to the top of the path, and I saw its fellow branch left to the Happy Valley. We'd climbed the path then that Jasper had wished us to take at the beginning of the afternoon. I knew now why Jasper had turned to it. It led to the beach he knew best, and the cottage. It was his old routine. We came out on the lawns and went across them to the house without a word. Maxim's face was hard, with no expression. He went straight into the hall and into the library without looking at me. Frith was in the hall. We want tea at once, said Maxim, and he shut the library door. I fought to keep back my tears. Frith must not see them. He would think we had been quarreling, and he would go to the servants' hall and say to them all, "Mrs. De Winter was crying in the hall just now. It looks as though things are not going very well." I turned away so that Frith would not see my face. He came towards me, though. He began to help me off with my mackintosh. "I'll put your raincoat away in the flower room, madam," he said. "Thank you, Frith," I replied, my face still away from him. "Not a very pleasant afternoon for a walk, I fear, madam." "No," I said. "No, it was not very nice." "Your handkerchief, madam?" he said, picking up something that had fallen on the floor. "Thank you," I said, putting it in my pocket. I was wondering whether to go upstairs or whether to follow Maxim to the library. Frith took the coat to the flower room, and I stood there, hesitating, biting my nails. Frith came back in again. He looked surprised to see me there. "There's a good fire in the library now, madam." "Thank you, Frith," I said. I walked slowly across the hall to the library. I opened the door and went in. Maxim was sitting in his chair, Jasper at his feet, the old dog in her basket. Maxim was not reading the paper, though it lay on the arm of the chair beside him. I went and knelt down by his side and put my face close to his. "Don't be angry with me any more," I whispered. He took my face in his hands and looked me down with his tired, strained eyes. "I'm not angry with you," he said. "Yes," I said, "I've made you unhappy. It's the same as making you angry. You're all wounded and hurt and torn inside. I can't bear to see you like this. I love you too much." "Do you?" he said. "Do you?" He held me very tight, and his eyes questioned me, dark and uncertain. The eyes of a child in pain, a child in fear. "What is it, darling?" I said. "Why do you look like that?" I heard the door open before he could answer, and I sank back on my heels, pretending to reach for a log to throw on the fire, where Frith came into the room, followed by Robert, and the ritual of our tea began. The performance of the day before was repeated, the placing of the table, the laying of the snow-white cloth, the putting down of cakes and crumpets, the silver kettle of hot water placed on its little flame, while Jasper, wagging his tail, his ears stretched back in anticipation, watched my face. 5 minutes must have passed before we were alone again, and when I looked at Maxim, I saw the color had come back to his face. The tired, lost look was gone, and he was reaching for a sandwich. "Having all the crowd to lunch was the trouble," he said. "Poor old Beatrice always does rub me the wrong way. We used to scrap like dogs as children. So fond of her, too, bless her. Such a relief, though, that they didn't live too near. Which reminds me, we'll have to go over and see Granny sometime. Pour out my tea, sweetheart, and forgive me for being such a bear to you." It was over then. The episode was finished. We must not speak of it again. He smiled at me over his cup of tea and then reached for the newspaper on the arm of his chair. The smile was my reward, like a pat on the head of Jasper. "Good dog, then, lie down. Don't worry about me any more." I was Jasper again. I was back where I had been before. I took a piece of crumpet and divided it between the two dogs. I did not want it myself. I was not hungry. I felt very weak now, very tired in a dull, spent way. I looked at Maxim, but he was reading his paper. He had folded over to another page. My fingers were messy from the butter from the crumpet, and I felt in my pocket for a handkerchief. I drew it out, a tiny scrap of a thing, lace-edged. I stared at it, frowning, for it was not mine. I remembered then that Frith had fallen out of the pocket of the mackintosh. I remembered then that Frith had picked it up from the stone floor of the hall. It must have fallen out of the pocket of the mackintosh. I turned it over in my hand. It was grubby, little bits of fluff from the pocket sticking to it. Must have been in the mackintosh pocket for a long time. There was a monogram in the corner, a tall, sloping R with the letters D-E-W interlaced. The R dwarfed the other letters. The tail of it ran down the cambric away from the laced edge. It was only a small handkerchief, quite a scrap of a thing. It had been rolled into a ball and put away in the pocket and forgotten. I must have been the first person to put on that mackintosh since that handkerchief was used. She who had worn the coat then was tall, slim, broader than I about the shoulders, for I had found it was big and overlong, and the sleeves had come below my wrists. Some of the buttons were missing. She had not bothered to do it up. She had thrown it over her shoulders like a cape or worn it loose, hanging open, her hands deep in the pockets. There was a pink mark upon the handkerchief, the mark of lipstick. She had rubbed her lips with the handkerchief and then rolled it into a ball and left it in the pocket. I wiped my fingers with the handkerchief, and as I did so, I noticed that a dull scent clung about it still. A scent I recognized, a scent I knew. I shut my eyes and tried to remember. It was something elusive, something faint and fragrant that I could not name. I breathed it before, touched it surely, that very afternoon. And then I knew that the vanished scent upon the handkerchief was the same as the crushed white petals of the azaleas in the Happy Valley. Chapter 11. The weather was wet and cold for quite a week, as it often can be in the West Country in early summer, and we did not go down to the beach again. I could see the sea from the terrace and the lawns. It looked gray and uninviting, great rollers sweeping into the bay past the beacon on the land head. I pictured them surging into the little cove and breaking with a roar upon the rocks, then running swift and strong to the shelving beach. If I stood on the terrace and listened, I could hear the murmur of the sea below me, lull and sudden. A dull, persistent sound that never ceased. And the gulls flew inland too, driven by the weather. They hovered above the house in circles, wheeling and crying, flapping their spread wings. I began to understand why some people could not bear the clamor of the sea. It has a mournful harping note sometimes, and the very persistence of it, that eternal roll and thunder and hiss, plays a jagged tune upon the nerves. I was glad our rooms were on the east wing, and I could lean out of my window and look down upon the rose garden. For sometimes I could not sleep, and getting softly out of bed in the quiet of the night, I would wander to the window and lean there, my arms upon the sill, and the air would be very peaceful, very still. I could not hear the restless sea, and because I could not hear it, my thoughts would be peaceful too. They would not carry me down that steep path through the woods to the gray cove and the deserted cottage. I did not want to think about the cottage. I remembered it too often in the day. The memory of it nagged at me whenever I saw the sea from the terrace, for I could see once more the blue spots on the china, and the spun webs on the little masts of those model ships, and the rat holes on the sofa. I would remember the pattering of the rain on the roof, and I thought of Ben, too, with his narrow, watery blue eyes, his sly smile. Those things disturbed me. I was not happy about them. I wanted to forget them, but at the same time, I wanted to know why they disturbed me, why they made me uneasy and unhappy. Somewhere in the back of my mind, there was a frightened, furtive seed of curiosity that grew slowly and stealthily, for all my denial of it, and I knew all the doubt and the anxiety of the child who's been told, those things are not discussed, they are forbidden. I could not forget the white, lost look in Maxim's eye when he came to the path through the woods, and I could not forget his words, "Oh God, what a fool I was to come back." It was all my fault because I had gone down to the bay. I had opened up a road into the past again, and although Maxim had recovered and was himself again, and we lived our lives together, sleeping, eating, walking, writing letters, driving to the village, working hour by hour through our day, I knew there was a barrier between us because of it. He walked alone on the other side, and I must not come to him. And I became nervous and fearful that some heedless word, some turn in a careless conversation should bring that expression back to his eyes again. I began to dread any mention of the sea, for the sea might lead to boats, to accidents, to drowning. Even Frank Crawley, who came to lunch one day, put me in a little fever of fear when he said something about the sailing races in Carith Harbor 3 miles away. I looked steadily at my plate, a stab of sickness in my heart at once, but Maxim went on talking quite naturally, did not seem to mind, while I sat in a sweat of uncertainty, wondering what would happen and where the conversation would lead us. It was during cheese. Frith had left the room, and I remember getting up and going to the sideboard and taking some more cheese, not wanting it, so as to not be at the table with them, listening, humming a little tune to myself so I could not hear. I was wrong, of course, morbid, stupid. This was the hypersensitive behavior of a neurotic, Not the normal happy self I knew myself to be. But I could not help it. I did not know what to do. My shyness and gauchiere became worse, too, making me stolid and dumb when people came to the house, for we were called upon. I remember during those first weeks by people who lived near us in the country, and the receiving in them and the shaking hands and the spinning out of the formal half hour became a worse ordeal than I first anticipated because of this new fear of mine that they would talk about something that must not be discussed. The agony of those wheels on the drive, that pealing bell, my own first wild rush for flight to my own room, the scrambled dab of powder on my nose, the hasty comb through my hair, and then the inevitable knock on the door and the entrance of the cards on a silver tray. All right, I'll be down immediately. The clap of my heels on the stairs and across the hall, the opening of the library door, or still, that long, cold, lifeless drawing room, and the strange woman waiting there, or two of them perhaps, or a husband and a wife. How do you do? I'm so sorry. Maxim is in the garden somewhere. Frith has gone to find him. We felt we must come and pay our respects to the bride. A little laughter, a little flurry of chat, a pause, a glance around the room. Manderley is looking as charming as ever. Don't you love it? Oh, yes, rather. And in my shyness and anxiety to please, those schoolgirl phrases would escape from me once again, those words I never used except in moments like these. Oh, ripping, and oh, topping, and absolutely, and priceless. Even, I think, to one dowager who had carried a lorgnette, cheerio. My relief at Maxim's arrival would be tempered by the fear that they might say something indiscreet, and I became dumb at once, a set smile on my lips, my hand on my lap. They would turn to Maxim then, talking of people and places I had not met or did not know, and now and again I would find their eyes upon me, doubtful, rather bewildered. I could picture them saying to one another as they drove away, "My dear, what a dull girl! She scarcely opened her mouth." And then the sentence I had first heard upon Beatrice's lips, haunting me ever since, a sentence I read in every eye, on every tongue. She's so different from Rebecca. Sometimes I would glean little snatches of information to add to my secret store. A word dropped here at random, a question, a passing phrase. And if Maxim was not with me, the hearing of them would be furtive, rather painful pleasure, guilty knowledge learnt in the dark. I would return a call, perhaps, for Maxim was punctilious in these matters and would not spare me. And if he did not come with me, I must brave the formality alone. And there would be a pause in the conversation while I searched for something to say. "Will you be entertaining much at Manderley, Mrs. De Winter?" they would say, and my answer would come, "I don't know. Maxim has not said much about it at the present." "No, of course. It's early yet. I believe the house was generally full of people in the old days." Another pause. "People from London, you know. There used to be tremendous parties." "Yes," I would say. "Yes, so I have heard." A further pause, and then the lowered voice that is always used about the dead or in the place of worship. "She was so tremendously popular, you know. Such a personality." "Yes," I would say. "Yes, of course." And after a moment or so, I would glance at my watch under cover of my glove and say, "I'm afraid I ought to be going. It must be after 4. "Won't you stay for tea? We always have it at 1:15. No, really. Thanks most awfully. I promised Maxim." My sentence would go trailing off into nothing, but the meaning would be understood. We would both rise to our feet, both of us knowing I was not deceived about her offer of tea, nor she in my mention of a promise to Maxim. I sometimes wondered what would happen if convention were denied, if, having got into the car and waved a hand to my hostess on the doorstep, I suddenly opened again and said, "I don't think I'll go back after all. Let's do go to your drawing room again and sit down. I'll stay to dinner if you like, or stay the night." I used to wonder if convention and good country manners would brave the surprise, and whether a smile of welcome would be summoned to the frozen face. But of course, how very delightful of you to suggest it. I used to wish I had the courage to try. But instead, the door would slam, the car would go bowling away down the smooth gravel drive, and my late hostess would wander back to her room with a sigh of relief and become herself again. It was the wife of the bishop in the neighboring cathedral town who said to me, "Will your husband revive the Manderley fancy dress ball, do you suppose? Such a lovely sight always. I shall never forget it." I had to smile as though I knew all about it and say, "We have not decided. There have been so many things to do and discuss." "Yes, I suppose so. But I do hope it won't be dropped. You must use your influence with him. There was not one last year, of course, but I remember 2 years ago the bishop and I went, and it was quite enchanting. Manderley so lends itself to anything like that. The hall looked wonderful. They danced there, then the music in the gallery, and was all so keeping. A tremendous thing to organize, but everybody appreciated it so." "Yes," I said, "yes, I must ask Maxim about it." I thought of the docketed pigeonholes in the desk in the morning room, pictured the stack upon stack of invitation cards, the long list of names, the addresses, and I could see a woman sitting there at the desk and putting a check behind the name she wanted, and reaching for the invitation cards, dipping her pen in the ink, writing upon them swift and sure, that long, slanting hand. "There was a garden party, too. We went to that one summer," said the bishop's wife. "Everything always so beautifully done. The flowers at their best. Glorious day, I remember. Tea was served at little tables in the rose garden. Such an attractive, original idea. Of course, she was so clever." She stopped, turning a little pink, feeling a loss of tact. But I agreed with her at once to save embarrassment, and I heard myself saying boldly, brazenly, "Rebecca must have been a wonderful person." I could not believe that I had said the name at last. I waited, wondering what would happen. I had said the name. I had said the word Rebecca out loud. It was a tremendous relief. It was as though I had taken a purge and rid myself of intolerable pain. Rebecca. I had said it out loud. I wondered if the bishop's wife saw the flush on my face, but she went on smoothly within the conversation, and I listened to her greedily like an eavesdropper in a shuttered window. "You never met her, then?" she asked, and when I shook my head, she hesitated a moment, a little uncertain of her ground. "We never knew her well personally, you know. The bishop was only inducted here 4 years ago, but of course she received us when we went to the ball and then to the garden party. We dined there, too, one winter. Yes, she was a lovely creature, so full of life." "She seemed to have been good at everything, too," I said, my voice just careless enough to show I did not mind while I played with the fringe of my glove. It's not often you get someone who is clever and beautiful and fond of sport. "No, I suppose you don't," said the bishop's wife. "She was certainly very gifted. I can see her now, standing at the foot of the stairs on the night of the ball, shaking hands with everybody, that cloud of dark hair against the very white skin, and her costume suited her so. Yes, she was very beautiful." "She ran the house herself, too," I said, smiling as if to say, "I'm quite at ease. I often discuss her." "It must have taken a lot of time and thought. I'm afraid I leave it to the housekeeper." "Oh, well, we can't do everything. And you are very young, aren't you? No doubt in time when you have settled down. Besides, you have your own hobby, haven't you? Someone told me you were fond of sketching." "Oh, that. I don't know that I can count on it much." "It's a nice little talent to have," said the bishop's wife. "It's not everyone that can sketch. You must not drop it. Manderley must be full of pretty spots to sketch." "Yes," I said. "Yes, I suppose so," depressed by her words, having a sudden vision of myself wandering across the lawn with a camp stool and a box of pencils under one arm, and my little talent, as she described it, under the other. It sounded like a pet disease. "Do you play any games? Do you ride or shoot?" she asked. "No, I don't do anything like that. I'm fond of walking," I added as a wretched anticlimax. "The best exercise in the world," she said briskly. "The bishop and I walk a lot." I wondered if he went round and round the cathedral in his shovel hat and his gaiters with her on his arm. She began to talk about a walking holiday they had taken once, years ago in the Piens, and how they had done an average of 20 miles a day, and I nodded my head, smiling politely, wondering about the Piens, and thinking they were something like the Andes, remembering afterwards they were the chain of hills marked by a furry line in the middle of a pink England on my school atlas. And he had all the time in his hat and gaiters. The inevitable pause, the glance at the watch unnecessary as her drawing-room clock chimed 4 in shrill tones, and my rise from the chair. "I'm so glad I found you, Em. I hope you will come and see us. We should love to. The bishop is always so busy, alas. Please remember me to your husband, and be sure to ask him to revive the ball. Yes, indeed, I will. Lying, pretending I knew all about it. And in the car going home, I sat in my corner, biting my thumbnail, seeing the great hall at Manderley thronged with people in fancy dress, the chatter, hum, and laughter of the moving crowd, the musicians in the gallery, supper in the drawing room probably, long buffet tables against the wall, and I could see Maxim standing at the foot of the stairs, laughing, shaking hands, turning to someone who stood by his side, tall, slim, with dark hair, said the bishop's wife. Dark hair against a white face, someone whose quick eyes saw to the comfort of her guests, who gave an order over her shoulder to a servant, someone who was never awkward, never without grace, who when she danced it left a stab of perfume in the air like white azalea. Will you be entertaining much at Manderley, Mrs. De Winter? I heard the voice again, suggestive rather than inquisitive, in the voice of that woman I had called upon to live on the other side of Kerrith, and I saw her eye, too, dubious, considering, taking in my clothes from top to toe, wondering with that swift downward glance given to all brides if I was going to have a baby. I did not want to see her again. I did not want to see any of them again. They only came to call at Manderley because they were curious and prying. They liked to criticize my looks, my manners, my figure. They liked to watch how Maxim and I behaved to each other, whether we seemed fond of one another, so that they could go back afterwards and discuss us, saying, very different from the old days. They came because they wanted to compare me to Rebecca. Would not return those calls anymore, I decided. I should tell Maxim so. I did not mind if they thought me rude and ungracious. It would give them more to criticize, more to discuss. They could say I was ill-bred. I'm not surprised, they would say. After all, who was she? And then a laugh and a shrug of the shoulders. My dear, don't you know? He picked her up in a Monte Carlo or somewhere. She hadn't a penny. She was a companion to some old woman. More laughter, more lifting of the eyebrows. Nonsense, not really. How extraordinary men are. Maxim, of all people, who was so fastidious. How could he after Rebecca? I did not mind. I did not care. They could say what they liked. As the car turned in the lodge gates, I leant forward in my seat to smile at the woman who lived there. She was bending down, picking flowers in the front garden. She straightened up as she heard the car, but she did not see me smile. I waved, and she stared at me blankly. I don't think she knew who I was. I leant back in my seat again. The car went on down the drive. When we turned at one of the narrow bends, I saw a man walking along the drive a little distance ahead. It was the agent, Frank Crawley. He stopped when he heard the car, and the chauffeur slowed down. Frank Crawley took off his hat and smiled when he saw me in the car. He seemed glad to see me. I liked Frank Crawley. I did not find him dull or uninteresting, as Beatrice had done. Perhaps it was because I was dull myself. We were both dull. We neither of us had a word to say for each other, like to like. I tapped on the glass and told the chauffeur to stop. I think I'll get out and walk with Mr. Crawley, I said. He opened the door for me. Been paying calls, Mrs. De Winter? He said. Yes, Frank, I said. I called him Frank because Maxim did, but he would always call me Mrs. De Winter. He was that sort of person. Even if we'd been thrown in a desert island together and lived there in intimacy for the rest of our lives, I should have been Mrs. De Winter. I've been calling on the bishop and found the bishop out, but the bishop's lady was at home. She and the bishop are very fond of walking. Sometimes they do 20 miles a day. In the pinnace. I don't know that part of the world, said Frank Crawley. They say the country around is very fine. An uncle of mine used to live there. It was the sort of remark Frank Crawley always made. Safe, conventional, very correct. The bishop's wife wants to know when we are going to have a fancy dress ball at Manderley, I said, watching him out of the tail of my eye. She came to the last one, she said, and enjoyed it very much. I did not know you have fancy dress dances here, Frank. He hesitated a moment before replying. He looked a little troubled. Oh, yes, he said after a moment. The Manderley ball was generally an annual affair. Everyone in the country came. A lot of people from London, too. Quite a big show. Must have taken a lot of organization, I said. Yes, he said. I suppose, I said carelessly. Rebecca did most of it? I looked straight ahead of me along the drive, but I could see his face returning towards me, as though he wished to read my expression. We, all of us, worked pretty hard, he said quietly. There was a funny reserve in his manner as he said this, a certain shyness that reminded me of my own. I wondered suddenly if he had been in love with Rebecca. His voice was the sort of voice that I should have used in his circumstances, had this been so. The idea opened up a new field of possibilities, Frank Crawley being so shy, so dull. He would never have told anyone, least of all Rebecca. I'm afraid I should not be of much use if we have a dance, I said. I'm no earthly use at organizing anything. There would be no need for you to do anything, he said. You would just be yourself and look decorative. That's very polite of you, Frank, I said, but I'm afraid I should not be able to do that very well either. I think you would do it excellently, he said. Dear Frank Crawley, how tactful he was and considerate. I almost believed him. But he did not deceive me really. Will you ask Maxim about the ball? I said. Why don't you ask him? He answered. No, I don't like to. We were silent then. We went along, walking the drive. Now that I had broken down my reluctance at saying Rebecca's name, first with the bishop's wife and now with Frank Crawley, the urge to continue was strong with me. It gave me a curious satisfaction. It acted upon me like a stimulant. I knew that in a moment or two I would have to say it again. I was down on one of the beaches the other day, I said. The one with the breakwater? Jasper was being infuriating. He kept barking the old man with the idiot eyes. You must mean Ben, said Frank, his voice quite easy now. He always potters about on the shore. He's quite a nice fellow. You never need be frightened of him. He would not hurt a fly. Oh, I wasn't frightened, I said. I waited a moment, humming a tune to give me confidence. I'm afraid that cottage place is coming to rack and ruin, I said lightly. I had to go in to find a piece of string or something to tie up Jasper. The china is moldy and the books are being ruined. Why isn't something being done about it? It seems such a pity. I knew he would not answer at once. He bent down to tie up his shoelace. I pretended to examine a leaf on one of the shrubs. I think if Maxim wanted anything done, he would tell me, he said, still fumbling with his shoes. Are they all Rebecca's things? I asked. Yes, he said. I threw the leaf away and picked another, turning it over in my hand. What did she use the cottage for? I said. It looked quite furnished. I thought from the outside it was just a boathouse. It was a boathouse originally, he said, his voice constrained again, difficult, the voice of someone who is uncomfortable about his subject. Then she converted it like that, had furniture put in and china. I thought it funny the way he called her she. He did not say Rebecca or Mrs. De Winter as I expected him to do. Did she use it a great deal? He asked. Yes, he said. Yes, she did. Moonlight picnics and one thing and another. We were walking again, side by side. I'm still humming my little tune. How jolly, I said brightly. Moonlight picnics must be great fun. Did you ever go to them? Once or twice, he said. I pretended not to notice his manner, how quiet it had become, how reluctant to speak about these things. Why is the buoy there in the little harbor place? I said. The boat used to moor there, he said. What boat? I said. Her boat. A strange sort of excitement was upon me. I had to go on with my questions. He did not want to talk about it. I knew that. But although I was sorry for him and shocked at my own self, I had to continue. I could not be silent. What happened to it? I said. Was that the boat she was sailing when she was drowned? Yes. It capsized and sank. She was washed overboard. What sort of boat size was it? I asked. About 3 tons. It had a little cabin. What made it capsize? It can be very squally in the bay, he said. I thought of that green sea, foam-flecked, that ran down channel beyond the headland. Did the wind come suddenly, I wondered, in a funnel from the beacon on the hill? And did the little boat heel to it, shivering in the white sail flat against a breaking sea? Could not someone have got out to her? Nobody saw the accident. Nobody knew she had gone, he said. I was very careful not to look at him. He might have seen the surprise in my face. I had always thought it happened in the sailing race, that other boats were there, the boats from Carrick, and the people were watching from the cliffs. I did not know she had been alone, quite alone, out there in the bay. They must have known up at the house, I said. No, he said. She often went out alone like that. She would come back any time of night and sleep at the cottage on the beat. Was she not nervous? Nervous? No. She was not nervous of anything. Did Maxim mind her going off alone like that? He waited a minute and then said, I don't know, he said shortly. I had the impression he was being loyal to someone, either to Maxim or to Rebecca, or perhaps even to himself. He was odd. Did not know what to make of it. She must have drowned then. She must have been drowned then, trying to swim to shore after the boat sank. Yes, he said. I knew how the little boat could quiver and plunge, the water gushing into the steering wheel, and how the sails would press her down suddenly, horribly in that gust of wind. Must have been very dark out there in the bay. The shore must have seemed very far away to anyone swimming there in the water. How long afterwards was it that they found her? I said. About 2 months, he said. 2 months? I thought drowned people were found after 2 days. I thought they would be washed up close to the shore when the tide came. Where'd they find her? I asked. Near Edgecombe, about 40 miles up channel, he said. I'd spent a holiday at Edgecombe once when I was 7. It's a big place with a pier and donkeys. I remember riding a donkey along the sand. How did they know it was her after 2 months? How could they tell? I wondered why he paused before each sentence, as though he was weighing his words. Had he cared for her then? Had he minded so much? Maxim went up to Edgecombe to identify her, he said. Suddenly, I did not want to ask him any more. I felt sick at myself, sick and disgusted. I was like a curious sightseer standing on the fringe of a crowd after someone had been knocked down. I felt like a poor person in a tenement building when someone has died, asking if I might see the body. I hated myself. My questions had been degrading, shameful. Frank Crawley must despise me. It was a terrible time for all of you, I said rapidly. I don't suppose you like being reminded about it. I just wondered if there was anything one could do up to the cottage, that's all. It seems such a pity, all that furniture being spoiled by the damp. He did not say anything. I felt hot and uncomfortable. He must have sensed that it was not a concern for the empty cottage that prompted me to ask these questions, and now he was silent because he was shocked at me. Ours had been a comfortable, steady sort of friendship. I had felt him an ally. Perhaps I had destroyed all of this, and he would never feel the same about me. What a long drive this is, I said. It always reminds me of the path in the forest at Grimm's fairy tale, where the prince gets lost, you know? It's always longer than one expects, and the trees are so dark and close. Yes, it is rather exceptional, he said. I could tell by his manner he was still on guard, as though waiting for a further question from me. There was an awkwardness between us that could not be ignored. Something had to be done about it, even if it covered me with shame. Frank, I said desperately, I know what you're thinking. You can't understand why I asked all those questions just now. You think I'm morbid and curious in a rather beastly way. It's not that, I promise you. It's only that sometimes I feel myself at such a disadvantage. It's all very strange to me, living here at Manderley. Not the sort of life I've been brought up to. When I go returning these calls, and I did this afternoon, I know people are looking at me up and down, wondering what sort of success I'm going to make of it. I can imagine them saying, what on earth does Maxim see in her? And then, Frank, I begin to wonder myself, and I begin to doubt, and I have a fearful, haunting feeling that I should never have married Maxim, that we're not going to be happy. You see, I know all the time, wherever I meet anyone new, they are all thinking the same thing. How different she is to Rebecca. I stopped, breathless, already a little ashamed of my outburst, feeling that now, at any rate, I had burned all my boats for all time. He turned to me, looking very concerned and troubled. Mrs. De Winter, please don't think that, he said. For my part, I can't tell you how delighted I am that you have married Maxim. It will make all the difference to his life. I am positive that you will make a great success of it. From my point of view, it's very refreshing and charming to find someone like yourself who is not entirely, he blushed, searching for a word, not entirely au fait, as we shall say, with ways at Manderley. And if the people around here give you the impression that they are criticizing you, it's most damnably offensive of them, that's all. I've never heard a word of criticism, and if I did, I should take great care that it was never uttered again. That is very sweet of you, Frank, I said, and what you say helps enormously. I dare say I have been very stupid. I'm not good at meeting people. I've never had to do it. And all the time I keep remembering how it must have been at Manderley before, when there was someone there who was born and bred to it, did it all naturally and without effort. And I realize every day the things I lack, confidence, grace, beauty, intelligence, wit, all the quality that mean most in a woman, she possessed. It doesn't help, Frank, it doesn't help. He said nothing. He went on looking anxious and distressed. He pulled out his handkerchief and blew his nose. You must not say that, he said. Why not? It's true, I said. You have qualities that are just as important, far more so, in fact. It's perhaps cheeky of me to say so. I don't know you very well. I'm a bachelor. I don't know very much about women. I lead a quiet sort of life down here at Manderley, as you know. But I should say that kindliness and sincerity, and if I may say so, modesty, are worth far more to a man, to a husband, than all the wit and beauty in the world. He looked very agitated and blew his nose again. I saw that I had upset him far more than I had upset myself, and the realization of this calmed me and gave me a feeling of superiority. I wondered why he was making such a fuss. After all, I had not said so very much. I had only confessed my sense of insecurity, following as I did upon Rebecca. And she must have had these qualities too that he presented to me as mine. She must have been kind and sincere, with all her friends, her boundless popularity. I was not sure what he meant by modesty. It was a word I never understood. I always imagined it had something to do with minding meeting people in a passage on the way to the bathroom. Poor Frank. And Beatrice had called him a dull man with never a word to say for himself. Well, I said, rather embarrassed, well, I don't know about all that. I don't think I'm very kind or particularly sincere, and for being modest, I don't think I've ever had a chance to be anything else. It was not very modest, of course, being married heartily like that down in Monte Carlo and being alone there in that hotel beforehand, but perhaps you don't count that? My dear Mrs. Winter, you don't think I imagined for one moment that your meeting down there was not entirely above board? He said in a low voice. No, of course not, I said gravely. Dear Frank, I think I had shocked him. What a Frankish expression, too, above board. It made one think immediately of the sort of things that would happen below board. I'm sure, he began, hesitated, his expression still troubled. I'm sure that Maxim would be very worried, very distressed if he knew how you felt. I don't think he can have any idea of it. Well, you won't tell him, I said hastily. No, naturally not. What do you take me for? But you see, Mrs. De Winter, I know Maxim pretty well, and I've seen him through many moods. If he thought you were worrying about the past, it would distress him more than anything on earth, I can promise you that. He's looking very well, very fit. But Mrs. Lacey was quite right the other day when she said he'd been on the verge of a breakdown last year, though it was tactless of her to say so in front of him. That's why you are good for him. You are fresh and young and sensible. You have nothing to do with all the time that is gone. Forget it, Mrs. De Winter. Forget it as he has done, thank heaven, and the rest of us. We none of us want to bring back the past, Maxim least of all. And it's up to you, you know, to lead us away from it, not to take us back there again. He was right, of course. Of course he was right. Dear good Frank, my friend, my ally. I had been selfish and hypersensitive, a martyr of my own inferiority complex. I ought to have told all you this before, I said. I wish you had, he said. I might have spared you some worry. Well, I feel happier, I said, much happier. And I've got you for my friend, whatever happens, haven't I, Frank? Yes, indeed, he said. We were out of the dark wooded drive and into the light again. The rhododendrons were upon us. Their hour would soon be over. Already they looked a little overblown, a little faded. Next month the petals would fall one by one from the great vases, and the gardeners would come and sweep them away. Theirs a brief beauty, not lasting very long. Frank, I said, before we put an end to this conversation forever, let's say, will you promise to answer me one thing quite truthfully? He paused, looking at me a little suspiciously. That's not quite fair. You might ask me something that I should not be able to answer, something quite impossible. No, I said, it's not that sort of question. It's not intimate or personal or anything like that. Very well, I will do my best, he said. We came around the sweep of the drive, and Manderley was before us, serene and peaceful in the hollow of the lawns, surprising me as it always did with its perfect symmetry and grace, its great simplicity. The sunlight flickered on the mullioned windows, and there was a soft, rusted glow about the stone walls where the lichen hung. A thin column of smoke curled up from the library chimney. I bit my thumbnail, watching Frank out of the corner tail of my eye. Tell me, I said, my voice casual, not caring a bit. Tell me, was Rebecca very beautiful? Frank waited a moment. I could see his face. I could not see his face. He was looking away from me towards the house. Yes, he said slowly. Yes, I suppose she was the most beautiful creature I ever saw in my life. We went up the stairs, then to the hall, and I rang the bell for tea. The most beautiful creature he's ever seen in his life. Oh, I am enamored. All right, so there we have it. We will join chapter 12 next time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, it's going to be very hard to not read ahead, but I won't. I will keep it in my heart, and I will not touch it until I see you guys again. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you next time. Bye.